Hi, everyone. It's Elizabeth McNamara from East Greenwich News, and it is take two with Town Councilor Mike Donegan. We had some technical difficulty. I had some technical difficulties the first time we did this, and so Mike was gracious enough to come back for a do-over. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Happy to do take two.
So what we're doing with these is just talking to the town councilors one-on-one because they're running unopposed this year. So it just didn't make a lot of sense for East Greenwich News or the chamber to host a candidates forum when you guys are all pretty much working on the same page, would you say? How do you characterize your collaboration with your fellow town councilors?
Sure. So, we've had a lot of challenges, to say the least about the most, but I really think that we work very well together as a team. We have changed a lot of the procedures in that prior to this council, you would see the agenda and a lot of the day-to-day issues all concentrated in what the majority party would vote in, who the majority party would vote in as the president. So that was Sue Cienki last time. So the town manager did that. Our council views this much more democratically. And so our agendas are made with input from everyone. The manager reaches out with our solicitors, and us, and puts together an agenda that everybody's had input into. We have had some significant work we've done together, and I think that every single council member is actually interested in the opinions of the others. We listen. We all do our homework well in advance of these meetings so that we can really try to get down to the crux of the issues we're trying to address as a group. And I think we work well together. We respect each other, and we all do the work, which is important.
That definitely isn't always the case that that you'd all collaborate on the agenda. So that's interesting.
Right. Yeah. So the way that works just procedurally is by our own rules, we have the council president and the town manager, right, are responsible for making it conform. But the way it works is any one of us can ask for an item to be put on the agenda. If we don't, the town manager will promote topics and ask us if each of us has anything we'd like on there. And so in that way, it's kind of a comprehensive agenda. And, he'll then sit with the president and the solicitor and see if procedurally some of the things for reasons related to procedure, they require additional notice or statutory requirements. We'll stagger them in a way that complies with the law and gets all of the priority issues addressed as we need them. So it's really a collaborative process.
Yeah, I think under the last council, at least two people had to ask for something to be put on an agenda. In other words, Mike Donegan would not have been able to float whatever it was he wanted to talk about. I mean, I don't know if is there anything like that now? Just curious.
Yeah, so we don't, so the procedures have been completely revamped, but in practicality, the way it works is that the reason it was made two by the last council, Mark Schwager was the only one. So by requiring two, you could eliminate Mark ever getting anything on the agenda. So we don't have that issue, and our agenda is really, we have a strong and competent, experienced town manager. So he rightfully solicits input from all of us, and anything any one of us wants to have on the agenda will be heard. And if there's any procedural requirement that it's two, it's never come to that. Anything you want on the agenda will be heard.
Okay. Well, I guess the first real question to ask is, why are you running for re-election?
Sure. So to put this in context, I ran for re-election like four of the other council members, and I'll throw Mark in there and make it five. We were coming off a very difficult time for our community. with the last town manager and sort of the agenda that was being put forward. And so I initially ran because our, we were reading about East Greenwich in the newspapers every day. We were on the news all the time. It was embarrassing, and it frankly injured our brand as a community. What was happening was they effectively defunded our schools, which are the reason most people move to East Greenwich.
Mhm.
Also is the single most important factor in supporting our high property values. We had ethical complaints daily. We had court decisions invalidating actions of the council and the town manager. We had to have police at our town meetings because they were so challenging. Public comment and engagement was a real thing. So that wasn't working for our community, and I don't think it represented the values in our community across party lines. In addition, there was this false bankruptcy narrative that was being put out there. The idea was to catastrophize very, very normal fiscal financial information and try to put it in some context of the private sector, which isn't even applicable. Even the accounting methods are different. And so, that wasn't it. The tenor of acrimony in our community created at that time was something that I wanted to change. And so that's why I ran. As soon as we, by the way, when the town voted for change, all the newcomers and Mark were swept in, all the others out. In fact, the existing state representative, Anthony Giarrusso, was voted out of office. Up in a circumstance where it was clear that across party lines, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, right, everybody wanted change. You don't have change of that proportion without people working across lines. And the way I looked at it was I never looked at it like it was a Democratic win. That wasn't my come from, because in town, everybody knows all the candidates. We know each other. People were voting for me or Ray New or Mark. They didn't, Mike Zarella, Karen, they weren't voting for some nameless people they read about in the paper. They were hoping that we'd make the change that they wanted. And over these last couple of years, I hope we did. When we came in, we had to rebuild the whole government. We had to hire a new town manager. That was one of the things I ran on, and we did that. We got rid of the old one. We hired Andy Nada, who's fabulous. He's a lawyer. He's got a degree in finance. He's experienced, a lifetime of public service. So we replaced Gail Corrigan with Andy Nada. We replaced Gail Corrigan's partner in the real world, Linda Dykeman, who was doing the finances for both the town and the schools.
Business partner, just to clarify.
Yes, business partner. So when we won, eventually she just, before we could even meet, she walked out. It learned that we hadn't completed the audit for the prior year. The financials were in complete disarray. We didn't have the town didn't know what it owed or what it was collecting. There hadn't been, payables hadn't even been entered for some months. And so we had a school committee that had already done an audit in preparation for a lawsuit against that town council, claiming they needed a $1.2 million additional allocation in order to properly operate the schools. That school committee was still seeking that money from us when we didn't even know where our finances were. We had 5 union contracts that needed to be negotiated, by the end of June. We come in basically January, right? And so we had that whole, we appointed Joe Duarte, acting town manager. I walked through that, worked with Mike D'Amico as a financial consultant to help us through that. And in the end, somewhere in there, we had a ransomware attack on the town. And so we navigated that without paying any ransom because we had properly taken the steps for offsite backup and all of that.
That was about a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Andy was here, but not here long.
No, just walked in the door. Right. So that started. And, we then hired Trish Sunderland as our, finance director, who's really experienced. Whereas the last group didn't have any understanding of the Munis software system, that is municipal software accounting, integrates with audit and other, budgetary software. Trish not only is infinitely familiar with it, she actually trains other communities in how to do that. So we were able, we were collecting payments for our taxes by hard checks in 5 different locations that may not ever make it in a timely fashion to our accounting department, get deposited, manually recorded. Like, none of that made any sense. It wasn't, current century technology. And so Trish was able to work through all of that to the point where we saved a lot of money just by properly accounting for things. What she then did was went out and refinanced some of the existing debt, which saved us millions. Like, the whole, it was a rebuilding process, and we look to hire the outstanding professionals in their fields. East Greenwich is a real top-notch community. We should have the best in those positions. And so we did all of that. Then what followed was, of course, the pandemic. So the last 2 years have been interesting and there's still a lot of work to be done. We still need to navigate this pandemic. We have funded the schools, but it's clear that unless the federal government funds the state, who will then fund the municipalities, that they're going to need to come back to us to cover these extraordinary COVID costs just to keep the schools open. And there's a lot of work that we have to do to prepare for that. We don't have that money on hand. We need to work with our state reps in order to try to get that money funneled to the communities. We even have the open question of, if we were to make a COVID appropriation now, say January, February, if things stay static, appropriation to the schools, under state law, maintenance of effort requirements mean that we have to continue that even after the COVID crisis abates. So we're working with Justine Caldwell and Senator Valverde to either amend the statute to provide for an exception for us, a one-time exception, if that's the hard route. The easier route is if we can get the RIDE commissioner to use language in the statute that says that one-time non-recurring expenses are exempt. You have to have approval for that. We would want that pre-approved. So we've talked to the school committee. It's been on their agenda. We're collectively going with them to RIDE to see if we can do that. If we can't,
I would think every city and town is probably pursuing that in some degree.
Every single city and town needs that, but not everybody's proactively on it. So there's a resolution that came out from the League of Cities and Towns, but we can't wait for the General Assembly to act on that. It also has broad implications. Some school committee somewhere might oppose that. Ours does not. I don't want to get dragged into that. So if we're going to do a statutory amendment, I'll make it just East Greenwich. And if the town and the school committee go together, that should, and with the experience that we've seen with Justine and Bridget getting laws passed that help the residents, I feel we have a very good chance of that, but I'm not going to wait until February or March when we are asked to give a supplemental appropriation to address that. And so that work still needs to be done. And then we have to navigate all the financial issues. If the money isn't forthcoming, how do we keep providing this municipal services at the same rate? If the tax collections are off because of the COVID crisis, the meals tax, if we don't get that, if we only get a small percentage of the payment in lieu of taxes payments we get for tech, these are all things that need to be navigated locally, but we can't just manage on the cost side. We also have to deal with the revenue side. And that requires people on the council who have experience interacting with the General Assembly on these issues. And I think for me, I can help in that regard.
Because just to refresh, you are a lawyer. You work
Yes, I'm an
environmental lawyer, but you have also, I mean, when I hear that, I tend to think you're helping, I don't know, fish hatcheries and things like that. But you have done bigger governmental sort of stuff?
Sure. So, for instance, I represent the state of Rhode Island that owns the Truckaway landfill in Warwick, Rhode Island. It was the city's landfill. The state ended up buying it. Now they have to close it, right, under federal law. And so I'm representing the state, working with the consultants and some of the large industries that contributed the waste site. And so we, work with the consulting firms and manage that, get the scope of work, have them do the investigation. I shepherd it through the process, which is closely linked with the local community, right? Because they have public participation and all of that. And so, remediating that landfill. I am, one of my biggest projects is probably the highest priority for the state right now is developing a port in East Providence that is a special built port designed to support the offshore wind farms that are being constructed proximate to the East Coast. This land happens to be, it's called the South Key, and it was land created by Providence and Worcester Railroad to fill out to the federal channel so that you could offload container ships and put them on rail. Well, we plan to finish it so it can be a heavy lift port. Given the weight of those components, normal ports can't handle them, but we will be able to. And so that kind of a project will have dramatic impacts for the state, because once you're offloading that equipment, it has to be serviced, assembled, then you have to barge it out to all the locations out there. There are endless numbers of companies that will have to locate here in Rhode Island in order to serve that need. So, I
shouldn't go down the rabbit hole. I'm curious though, why not Quonset for something like that?
They already have Quonset and Provport already do some of that. It's just that the capital stack necessary to build one of these ports, call it $100 million for ease of consideration. The way they're funded is usually it's 60% federal grants under the infrastructure programs there. There are port grants that come, and then there are build grants that come for those. Then there's usually a 20% state component, and then 20% equity, and so at Quonset, that's a quasi state agency that's running that, the industrial. So they're not in a position to put in $20 million. That doesn't exist for them. And so it has to have a private kind of entity that's willing to do it and that owns the land. And so my client has that. The state of Rhode Island Commerce Corp just gave $15 million in tax credits for this. So this is proceeding, but that's kind of what I do. It necessarily involves interaction with the governor's office, with the General Assembly, municipalities. So I have some experience at the General Assembly, and I think I can help. When we looked at changing the statute by which East Greenwich is allowed to tax different classes of property, I ended up drafting that, working with Justine Caldwell and Senator Valverde. I testified at the State House to get that legislation passed. So as we move forward in this crisis, and we need state support at various levels to run our government and fund our schools, I think I can help in that regard.
Just to veer off for the General Assembly election, we did ask both Anthony Giarusso and Chad Callanan if they would have supported that change that allowed the town to charge two tiers, a commercial tier and a residential tier. And they both said they wouldn't. And I guess that makes it more challenging for you guys if they were to get elected. And you want, that's already a done deal. But, what do you think about that?
Sure. So the good news is after I wrote a letter to the editor, AG News, talking about this very thing and how Senator Valverde and Representative Caldwell helped us with that, right? These real dollars, and how they got almost $1 million of funding back in the appropriation for the schools. If you're looking at $1 million there and the equivalent in tax revenue that wasn't put on the residents,
Mhm.
I mean, a couple $1 million is almost the entire 4% tax increase allowed by law. And it's not just for this year, it's every year going forward because that is maintained. And so I heard them say that
Mhm.
candidate forum. And interestingly, I got a call about 3 days ago from Anthony Giarrusso.
Mhm.
And he wanted to discuss, sort of my view on who I'm supporting. And I won't share that conversation. But when I challenged him with why would that he might not take a measure to the General Assembly if he's elected,
Mhm.
that the whole council voted unanimously to do. And
Mhm.
his response was, well, I wouldn't want to raise taxes on anybody. And I
Right.
said, okay, but then I walked through how it was a 0.9% tax on the residents.
Mhm.
And the way we could fully fund the schools was to address the issue, which was inequitable, where the residents were paying above market in taxes so that the business could pay half of the market in taxes. And I explained how
The market being how much
the
they pay in
commercial
other.
industrial tax, and gave as an
Mhm.
example Outback Steakhouse and
Right.
Texas
Right.
Roadhouse, 100 feet from each other. One's paying
Mhm.
close to double the taxes in Warwick.
Mhm.
And neither one they're not in Warwick or East Greenwich because of the school system, the waterfront, or the
Mhm.
community we have. They're solely there, like most of our restaurants in that area, because what we have is a confluence of Route 4, Route 2, 95,
Mhm.
Post Road. It's all traffic. That's why Outback Steakhouse went there and Texas Roadhouse. And so if Texas Roadhouse didn't think they could operate in paying almost double the taxes as Outback, then they
Mhm.
won't be located there. And I would like to point out that they're still open, whereas Ruby Tuesdays in the lower tax bracket, is already closed. It's because of the market and the foot traffic. That's how businesses decide this.
Mhm.
So I explained to Anthony how one of the things we did was significantly raise the tangible tax,
Mhm.
yet we gave an exemption which meant that way more than 50% of our small businesses paid zero or less than they were paying under the prior statute
Mhm.
tax rate. And what it really did is it meant that National Grid, by far our largest taxpayer,
Mhm.
ended up paying hundreds of thousands of dollars more to East Greenwich for the pipes that ran down from Warwick down Route 2 and cross over into East Greenwich. What they were doing was getting a massive discount whenever the utility lines came into East Greenwich from from Warwick and West Warwick. And
Mhm.
it's crazy that National Grid would pay taxes $62, $63 in communities and only pay 23 in East Greenwich. So our residents are paying
Yeah.
higher utility rates so National Grid can give taxes to Woonsocket and Providence and Warwick.
So
So
did Anthony decide it was a
did.
good idea?
Yes, Anthony said that I didn't know that, but if I were the rep and you came and explained that to me, of course I'd take that forward.
Mhm.
So
Huh.
that was nice to hear. I asked him why he didn't ask me that about this before he said this publicly as his position.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, all you would have had to do was attend one of the 8 hearings we talked about it at publicly, any of the
Mhm.
budget sessions we talked about. In fact, the last budget session, when we found the money to keep the teachers employed at the schools, we
Mhm.
did it by moving the tangible tax and moving the exemption. So the residents paid nothing for that. And so, he said that he was a private citizen and not the incumbent. And
Mhm.
I said, okay, well, you're calling me now and you're a private citizen, right? So I think that it was, I believe that he just misunderstood, and I can't speak for Charles on that issue.
Mhm. Mhm. He has not reached out to you, but
Neither
and
before he made the statement nor after he made the statement. None of
mhm.
them attended any council meetings on the issue, and they were
They
completely
might have been on Zoom calls, but no, you're right. That was after the
right.
budget, but kind of after, not quite after, but
Never, I can tell you this: neither one of them at all,
mhm.
any of the hearings on this,
Mhm. Yeah.
budget or otherwise, ever raised a hand and asked us why or voiced opposition to it.
Why do you think people aren't attending the meetings these now? You know, they certainly were 2 years ago. We often had, you literally had to move meetings to Swift Community Center because so many people were interested in attending. And now, before pre-COVID, there weren't a lot, and it's a little easier maybe now that you could tune in at home. And ideally, we're providing a service by streaming it to Facebook so you could catch it in a way you might not otherwise. But still, not that many people are watching. Why is that?
Right. So I think of local government. I think of it perhaps differently. I look at it like when the last council was in, everybody knew them. Everyone knew the issues because things weren't going well. We were in the press every day. All these issues were brought home to them because frankly, that wasn't what the community wanted. I don't think those were the values we have. And so I think what happens is maybe linked to why we don't have any opponents this round, which is that if we're doing what the community wants, if we are reflecting their values in the actions we take, in the professionals we hire, think Gail Corrigan, Andy Nada, if the way we engage them is different, public comment before the meetings, public comment after the meetings in case you got there late, or at the beginning in case you have to go home early, public comment after every agenda item, before we take a vote. Access, they can call us anytime. We speak to our residents all the time. So if they're engaged in a way that didn't happen before, they understand what we're doing. We put our meetings online for the first time. And if you can't make a meeting, you can always go look at it on the website, the town website. So everything, the judge asked us when it came to the last council to turn the lights on in East Greenwich. I believe that we did. And we funded the schools. Our first year, we gave them a supplemental appropriation. So we fully funded them. We funded them this last time. When they had to make cuts from some of the teachers, we went and found the money and kept those jobs. The superintendent Myers said that the most important thing to her was to keep those teachers in front of kids. And so she, to her credit, she participated in our town council meeting. I asked her specifically, if we find that money, will you keep those teachers in front of kids? And she can't, of course, speak for the school committee, but she said that's her highest priority, which I took to be her commitment. And that's what they did. So another example of us working together in trust with the school committee and Superintendent Myers that kept those, we went and got the money, we kept those teachers in front of them. I think that funding our schools, protecting our children, that we went out to bond issues, right, to help the infrastructure in the schools. I think that's a value the community has. That's why they voted for it. And you can imagine who the characters were who put out just before the school bond was voted on, signs in public meetings saying, vote no on question 2, whatever that was. Bad for students, bad for schools. That's a bond issue to help the students in the schools. And that's those are the kind of people we were up against. And that's what they put out there. But the community saw through that and they voted to help their children. We've reduced the debt, right, at the schools. We negotiated 5 union contracts, which the unions worked with us in our challenges. They took 0 the first year, 2 and 2%. That's 1.33 over 2 years when the going rate in arbitration is 3%. And they knew that. They weren't hustled. They worked with us because of our approach to save the taxpayers' money. The much ballyhooed floaters on the fire department contract, we got back. Okay, we negotiated those back. The last council gave them away. When it came time to look at cutting unfunded pension liabilities, we were aggressive and we negotiated the contract with the fire and police, okay, and our unions, where we no longer have to worry about bringing in lateral hires because we inherit their retirement obligations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you come in, if we own you for a year, we pay 2% of that. So you don't get all of that from us, which is what the law used to be. With that and some of the changes as to how we're going to fund your insurance requirements and retirement obligations, other post-employment benefits, we cut $6 million off of that. So I think we're managing their money 0.9% on the residents, and the increases on the commercial rates in order to try to make it more equal, even though it's not, was supported in both instances by the Chamber of Commerce. I personally worked with Steve Lombardi at the Chamber of Commerce with the spreadsheets showing the impacts on businesses and their tangible tax and all of that. So we are engaged with them, the business community. We had to work with the state in order to open up Main Street on Sundays to increase foot traffic for our small businesses. And we don't own that road. So that was a lift. You know, we went to the state, we just got $75,000 in outside grant money. Thank you, Andy and staff. They did a great job. You know, I think in the end, we kept their taxes low. We funded their schools. We managed their union contracts in a fiscally responsible way by working with the unions. And I think we've engaged them. We put our meetings online, transparency. My hope is that the reason you don't see people there is that they're engaged, they know what we're doing, and we're reflecting their values. And maybe that's why we didn't have any opponents this time.
I mean, you've talked a lot about having to, you know, the things you had to do when you came into office in terms of filling positions, teasing out, well, having Trish and others tease out what was happening in the finance department. Were there any other issues? I mean, I guess I can't help but think of the noise ordinance. I know it's a niche issue to a certain degree. It doesn't affect a whole lot of people, but it did bring a lot of passion. And people really felt like you guys wanted to ruin the waterfront, change it all forever. And I guess Blue on the Water still kind of feels that way since they did sue the town. Since COVID descended, everything changed this summer. We didn't have the normal summer that we normally have. So the issue didn't quite come up, but it is kind of working its way through the court. Do you feel like you did well as a council in dealing with that issue? You feel good about how it was handled?
I do. So when you talk about, you know, the energy generated on, you know, ruining the waterfront, that all came from one spot, Blue on the Water. And
well, you know, I mean, I think there was concern from the Finns as well.
I understand, but they didn't bring that energy. And Mark Finn, in fact, said, okay, we'll work with it. And but keep in mind, it's not as if it's Blue on the Water required its employees to show up at these hearings. I know one of them. So this was not, these are all people who don't live in town. You know, they went and found some select people who know them, who would show up and argue this. We had a prior council member, Andy Deutsch, who played in bands and used to go there and is friends with them. And so he would start, you know, so there was a lot of sound and fury, none of it addressing the merits. The story is that once upon a time, the Cellos family operated Cellos in Warwick on the water, right up the road. And for 2 years, there were hearings in front of the zoning board, the town council, etc., all about the noise and how it was impacting residents. Eventually, after a bunch of contentious hearings, their decision was to move to East Greenwich, where they'll get the support of the then council and they can do what they want. And so that's what they did. They claimed they were going to go out of business. they were going to have to, lose all these jobs. The Warwick could lose all this revenue. You can go by there anytime you want. They're open. They're, employing people. When they came to East Greenwich, if you looked at the website then, under the last council, they advertised that they were trying to bring a slice of South Beach to Rhode Island. Now, that's one thing if you're on South Beach. It's another thing if you're in the middle of a neighborhood. The restaurants on the waterfront, when they had music, when I first moved to East Greenwich, it was a guy with a guitar singing a John Denver song. It was like a ski lodge kind of version of that. And so what they had turned it into on the water was foam machines and massive capacity increases. And our police chief described it as if every 4 days a week during the warm weather, it was turned into a festival down there. Everybody speeding, disturbing the peace, trampling people's lawns, urinating on their lawns. And when you knock on doors down there and talk to the residents, they honestly can't even sleep while that's going on. And so I get how this makes money for Blue, having a nightclub in the middle of our neighborhood. But it has to be a balance. And the last council had actually increased the decibel level to accommodate them. And basically it instructed the police not to enforce it. So we walked into an environment where it was, the residents have a right to enjoy their property and the business has a right to operate as a business. How do we strike a balance? So what we did was we ended up getting together with the businesses who are affected and together with Blue on the Water, right? They were represented by council. We collectively had our town manager and our police. We had public meetings with them. We worked through what the issues were. We, in fact, engaged a sound expert. And Blue on the Water agreed that he was an expert, even funded him. We set up listening stations. We had people on the ground. So when there was a high decibel level, they could say, oh, that a train went by, or there's a truck, or, we could do that. That information was all recorded. Residents actually provided emails saying at this time, this I can't, this is extra loud, or this is not. So all that information was collected. Blue on the Water came in at one of the hearings and said that they had designed, and they showed a PowerPoint presentation about how they were going to build, like a high fence. They were going to have 2 barrels deep of water in these barrels that would absorb the sound. They were going to turn this. They were going to do all of this stuff. None of that ever happened. And so what we had was at the end, our expert, after all of this input from everybody, came back and made a recommendation on decibel levels. And the decibel levels were listed as dB and DC, different. If you look at the science, right, some waves travel through solids more than others. And so it doesn't do to set one level if the other wave is getting through that and causing the problems. And so in other states, they routinely have those different levels. And so Rhode Island did not. But we were looking at this scientifically. We are not people who deny science. And so we looked at it, and they came back with a recommendation. In fact, the recommendations are even higher than the World Health Organization says are safe. And so gave his testimony, and then we started to talk about it. At that point, Blue on the Water, their lawyer appeared. He said that they didn't agree, and before we take action, they would like to have another expert that they were going to retain. We said, when can you have the expert there? We want to hear all the evidence. And so that lawyer said that his son was getting married, and we said, great, take your time. When picked a date, and that evening came, and they had not submitted any expert report, nor had they requested a continuance of any sort. And so they really didn't have any expert witnesses of any kind. And so our expert that they had funded testified again. They the lawyer made claims that this would totally destroy the bit, meaning that they would have no beneficial use of the property, right? That simply isn't accurate, because obviously, even if you didn't have music, you would have a restaurant on the waterfront. You could have you would have music that is not live. So that's just not the case. We talked about it. We tried to ask if there was any information that we could evaluate on these claims. There was none. It was all about how Blue claimed it would impact their business. Nothing about the sound impact on residents. So the only evidence we had was presented by the expert that we all funded, including Blue. And so, we deliberated on that. We talked about their schedules, like when they actually have bands in. We limited hours to try to make it so they could have some flexibility in operating at the higher decibels rather than the sleep level decibels. And so, that's what we eventually settled as a council, and unanimously selected that schedule and that ordinance amendment.
So I mean, I let you kind of go on, and maybe I should have, but the long and short of it is, you feel comfortable with how it all played out.
It was the right thing to do. How could we have had more public involvement, even with Blue, who objected? We jointly hired experts. Like, how do you do more than that? They just didn't like the result.
Right.
So they have their rights, and right now it's being litigated. I won't comment on pending litigation. I feel very comfortable that we had a sound legal advice. It's not like we didn't anticipate a challenge by them. So we had what I think of as fabulous legal advice preparing for this. The record is full. There's actually no expert testimony contradicting our expert on the record. So I feel very comfortable with it. But they're entitled to pursue whatever they'd like, but I'm confident. And I think we did the right thing.
Thinking about what's happened in the last few months with regard to, first, George Floyd is killed in Minneapolis, and we have protests, and we have just a new level of awareness for some of us, perhaps. Of course, if you're a Black person in America, maybe it's not new at all. But there are a lot of us who are maybe catching up and going, are we doing what we need to be doing? And in a community like East Greenwich that is so white, how do we become a community where we are welcoming both to, where we might have a police force that has more people of color, that we might have a fire department that does, or even have women in the fire department. We do have one woman police officer. And schools you can't address, I know, but we don't do well on that score either. And yet we do have people of color coming through our town. Even if they aren't living here, they are working here. We have a lot of people, Latino and Latina people, who are working at the restaurants, who are coming through and might get pulled over for a car violation or something like that. What do you think? How does the town council help bring us along as a town?
Sure.
Or should you?
What we've actually done, right? So it is true that awareness of these issues has really been brought to the forefront, right, over this last year and a half, 2 years. And so what we did is we talked to our town manager. We talked to the police. I personally talked to the police to talk about a couple things. Number one is whether or not our police force is taught the chokehold in question. So as the world comes full circle, my thesis in my paper at UPenn Law School was about the use of the chokehold. Okay, and without boring you, at the time there was a forced procedural issue. You had to either seek money or an injunction from them doing it again. And it's hard to find a lawyer who seeks to litigate forever when there's no payoff at the end. So, or the victim of a chokehold, you go for the money with that lawyer. That's what people did. And to win an injunction, you had to show that you were more likely than the average person to have it happen to you. But you're dead, so you can't prove that. So when this all, was coming full circle, I talked to the police about that. We in East Greenwich here, we do not teach the chokehold that is in question. Okay, I believe they told me that that's not even taught in the state. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Andy Nada has talked to the police chief about awareness and all, and so I don't know the details of what trainings they're doing. I do know that East Greenwich has one luxury in that we know the police officers, and we don't have these experiences. We don't have a Floyd. We don't have those experiences. And
but again, I mean, just to be realistic, you and I don't. But maybe some people who don't have nice cars or who are passing through our town, because our town does, we are a pass-through town for certain, because of the Route 4 connection and 95. It's all well and good for you and me to be safe, perhaps, or feel comfortable with our police and feel clubby with them, because there's a lot of good people on the force, and it's really nice to be able to wave and say, how are you, and all that kind of stuff. But how do we make sure that we're treating people who pass through and stuff like that well? Right.
So the answer is there's a difference between holding them in regard, right? Like when my children are 5 children are in schools and you see the resource officers, right, doing a good job, or you see our police officers make arrests, or you see them respond in a really measured and responsible way. It's one thing to think they're doing a good job and respect them, or to be clubby with them. In the end, I got to negotiate their contracts. I don't think of myself that way. But like I would in private practice, supporting employees, I do, but I don't forget that I'm the employer. So what we can do is we've talked to our town manager, and you've probably seen Andy Nada and Bob Hodeling doing endless videos, walkthroughs about these issues. And Andy is going to be doing, they're already working on having these fora where they will address a lot of these issues. Andy has worked closely with the chief on awareness, and the council actually manages under the charter by and through the town manager. So you wouldn't want me to start managing the police department. What we do is manage. So Andy is already all over that. We could have a town manager who watches our money, manages things well, but also is acutely aware of the important social issues with a perspective. And I think he does a good job at that.
All right, thanks for that. Another worry a lot of people have is development. That proposal for division that isn't even quite a proposal yet. It was a pre-application, so nothing's actually been filed yet for 418 units, of which a quarter of those would be deemed affordable, giving them that kind of fast pass through the regulatory process. People have private property. They're allowed to develop property. How does the town, and yet the town has limited taxing capacity, partly because the state has a limit, or has that cap. How do we balance providing services, keeping our schools as nice as we want them to be, but also being a welcoming community to new people?
Right. So so that conflates a whole bunch of issues. But the so if the first question is, well, understanding the framework, and as you know, but some of the people watching might not, I was on the planning board for 6 years and the chairman there, right through this affordable housing explosion. Every hearing was about that. And so the first thing to understand is the General Assembly passed a law saying that affordable housing is a critical issue It's not like an important issue. This is critical. And the priority they gave it was fast track permitting. They believed that wealthy communities will not ever give zoning and planning board approval or town council zone changes for affordable housing. So they took them out of the equation. What happens is you now go one-stop shopping to the planning board, which sits as your council, as your historic district commission, as your cemetery commission, as your zoning board. And what they do is they apply these statutory criteria to an approval. As long as 25% is affordable, and you're a comprehensive permit application. You have so many days after it's a complete application to issue a decision, or it's approved. So you can't delay it. If you deny it, the law generally in a non-affordable housing comp permit, it's just a normal development, if you're denied, you have to appeal to Superior Court. And the body that denied you, the zoning board, right, and have to have made an error of law in order for you to flip their decision. Here, when the planning board, acting as every approval authority in town, denies an application, the parking, anything, the zoning is inappropriate. It's a zoned farm and you want to put high rises. Whatever the reason is, the developer gets to appeal it directly to the State Housing Appeals Board. SHAB. And so SHAB basically decides for the developer in communities where we haven't already met the 10% requirement. What happens is they decide for the developer almost universally. Because their mandate is to increase affordable housing. They're reviewing this to see if the rights of the applicant were protected under the statute. So not only that, but when SHAB renders a decision, if the community appeals it, then it goes to court, and now the standard is only whether they made an error of law. Whether SHAB did. SHAB, it's no longer right. So SHAB gets to look at the planning board's denial as if it's a de novo review and say, it's great that you found that this violates the comp plan. But we think that considering the 4 and 5 factors, you have the 10%. Does it further the goals of the statute? So any housing proposal, if you put 10,000 condo units on one lot, that would further the goal of the statute. So they list these criteria without any weighting of them. And so it's almost impossible for them, if they flip you, to win in court. And so that being the come from, communities like ours have real challenges. So we look at the biggest burden of having any housing in our community at all, affordable or not, is the burden on the schools. We can't collect enough money in property taxes to fund educating the children with the state mandates. It just can't be done. No community does that. And so what happens is when our schools look at projecting student populations into the future, what they do, and frankly, we do it for sewer capacity and other municipal services. We project the build out over the next few years in town. Think about what happens. If we look at a piece of property that's 3 acres and it's zoned residential, what we know is you can probably get 2 or 3 houses there. But if someone, so we build that in. If you have 30 acres that are commercial, industrial, we say no housing. But then along comes a developer who wants to take advantage of the statute. And as long as they put 25% of the units as affordable, 3 acre lots, 23 units now. The industrial that was 0 as a projection is now 400 units. So how does a community plan for its municipal services? How do we plan for our school student needs if we have no ability to even control that kind of development or project it with any reasonable degree of certainty? It can't be done. So what can we do? Right. So You may have heard at the last council meeting. So
Mhm.
I can't change the law. And again,
The state law, the mandate, the
affordable housing,
10%.
right? Having affordable housing,
Mhm.
I want that here. When I was in the planning board, but for one development on South Pierce,
Mhm.
really was wildly disproportionate to what the site could hold. When I was on the planning board, we approved every application because they frankly met the requirements. Um, so we value affordable housing. We also value not having our children taught in trailers or having 45 kids in a classroom.
Mhm.
So these are competing issues under that statute. And so what do we do? So I've given this some thought, and just my one person's thought on this
Mhm.
is that we're never going to get that statute changed in this climate, is my view of what the General Assembly will do. And so what can we do? What if we make a parallel system that gives even greater incentives to do something else?
Hmm.
No developer wants to sell 25% of their units at below market at the median income, which has a unit going for approximately $250,000. The land costs in East Greenwich mean that's kind of a loser. They hope to make it up by having greater density as allowed under the statute.
Mhm.
But what if what we did was we had a parallel quick approval process for age restricted housing? So it's senior housing.
Mhm.
We give you the same density bonus, the same, right? We could even make that sweeten the pot on that one. What would happen is the developers would no longer be incentivized to go the comp permit way, and they would be incentivized to go the age restricted way.
Now,
And when
just to
seniors go there, there's no impact on your schools. In fact, if
true,
you
but
look at
can't
it,
they, couldn't they say, can't they come back, those developers, and say, because I know that Tom Primo did build that one development on Middle,
yeah,
um, and or is building it now, and I think it's targeted to seniors.
mhm.
But isn't there always that possibility they come back, they say, hey, there's no market for this?
They can say what they want, but the town, there's a deed restriction, and the
Hmm.
approval that they have to come back for certificate of occupancy.
Hmm.
If they don't meet the requirements, they don't get the CO. So they can't close.
Hmm.
So the town has the cards. We could always make a different decision and release them if that made sense for some reason, but we're
Hmm.
not required to. In the end, we control it. It's not happening to us. And if you think about a senior, how
Hmm.
we're 55, 60, whatever the number is, we pick. If what happens is you get the same 400 units that's
Hmm.
proposed on Middle, and what would happen there is we can make it so that from a lot of these developments, from the public way into the development,
Hmm.
those are all private driveways. So the municipality doesn't pay to repair the roads. They don't pay to plow the streets. They don't provide any education of the students. And what ends up happening
Yeah.
is purely a money maker for the town. There will be, in the only services we provide will be, right, that they'll need are going to be sewer that they pay for, market rate,
Hmm.
will be any rescue and fire services, right?
Hmm.
Rescue services, if they have insurance, that's going to be paid for. And then, you'll have police services. But in the end, we're in a very different economic situation than we
Hmm.
are with a comp permit.
So there's a couple of things there. One, I do know that there have been developments put forward with this private street idea.
Mm-hmm.
And often what happens is 10, 15 years after people have moved in, they come to the town, they say, hey, we're paying taxes. Why don't we get this? And I believe in most of those circumstances, the town has said, yeah, you're right. And
So
kind
that's
of
not the case.
folded that in.
Yeah. So that's not
I mean, it's a choice the town can make, but I think it becomes harder to say no to tax-paying residents than it does to a developer at the beginning?
So, so every council is going to be different. I know that we've been approached by one development saying, hey, we don't want to put our garbage at the end of our, onto the public way, right?
Mhm.
So we want the municipal services here. We don't want to plow it and all of that. The problem is that the road that was built
Mhm.
is too narrow to take our fire trucks.
Mhm.
It won't support with the utilities underneath. They're not safe.
Mhm.
And we don't have the turning radius for a fire truck. So in the end, the answer is no on that from this council. Of course, you can ask every other council in the future.
Mhm.
But the important thing is, even if you provided those services, you're still in a net positive economic situation without burdening the schools.
Right.
And
So then there is kind of another issue, and that's that why not in a town like East Greenwich offer people who are poorer
Mhm.
the opportunity to attend our schools? People say there's a bit of an education apartheid where
Sure.
people who move to East Greenwich get lovely schools, and people
Mhm.
who have to stay in Central Falls
Right. Exactly.
don't, or
Right.
Providence or Pawtucket maybe don't.
Mhm.
Do we have a moral imperative? Do we just say, I'm sorry, we're only going to take older people who aren't going to have kids? Or, do we need to kind of push ourselves to say, this is a state issue and we need to help?
Right. So we've in fact increased our affordable housing by 50%. Okay, since I first got on the planning board.
Hmm.
And so we're at going to be at 6.2, after the construction of Route 2, I think that's the one on Route 2. So we're
Hmm.
like 6.2%. And so these will happen incrementally. The problem is that real estate doesn't happen in a measured way over 25 years.
Hmm.
It happens all in the boom. And so you don't have the ability to, with a cap on taxes of 4%, you don't even have the ability to raise the money to address it.
Unless you got your state legislators to petition to, I mean, you can get permission. I know certain communities do from time to time to tax over the cap in order to,
And
or
so
to
where
give
that,
more to the schools.
right, but where that happens is in bonding, not operations.
Hmm.
So you're not going to say, hey, we've mismanaged our plans, our
Hmm.
operating budget. We don't want to actually raise taxes, so we'd like to bond it. You can't use it for operating expenses.
Hmm.
So that's not an answer. The and and your if development happened, right, all real estate development happened, 5% a year over 30 years.
Right.
This isn't a
Hmm.
problem. It's that it happens in one crush in a couple of years, and then it tanks again. When my first term on the planning board, there were none
Hmm.
of proposals. There
Yeah.
were none. The real estate market had tanked after the last fiscal crisis, and
Right.
so that wasn't it. Now it's the last 2 years I was on the planning board, we had to meet not a couple times a month. It was much more frequently, and they were going till 11, 12 o'clock at night just to even address all the applications.
Hmm.
And so I agree. Absolutely have a moral obligation to have affordable housing. The question is, do we also have a moral obligation to try to manage how we can provide our education to our students? And this one statute, because it's so developer focused and it takes all the authority out of the town councils, it leaves you in a circumstance is that even the councils with the highest moral values
Hmm.
could end up having really dramatic impacts on our students that we can't control.
Hmm.
And so that's the tension every community feels and what you struggle with. And think about what's happening in the state. Our community is such that other schools in South County, they're all shrinking. Throughout the state, populations are
Yeah,
shrinking.
I think there's only 4 cities and towns that are.
They're expanding. And East Greenwich is the biggest, is the most rapidly expanding. Everybody wants to live here. And so at all price points, we are having expansion and additional housing stock added, all of which impacts our schools.
Hmm.
And so think about it. There's a 400 unit development that the planning board denies, but it gets approved at SHAB.
Mhm.
How many bedrooms are there? Are they 2-bedroom units? So that's 800 bedrooms. Are there 2 kids?
Mhm.
Our high school is 800 students. Are you really adding 800 more just from the development? And then on Route 2, you have 100 and something going in there. How many is that going to be? Like, pretty soon, you're going to be building a duplicate school system to handle.
I hear what you're saying. I don't, I drove through. I mean, there would certainly be kids, and that development on Route 2, the developer said their estimates were 4 or 5 kids total, and I'm
Right.
absolutely sure they're wrong. I can't imagine where they got that number from, but but it's not going to be 100 kids. Most likely, actually, who knows? As Lisa Bourbonnais says, you don't know until they move in.
And you don't. And let me give you an example of, so in the development that we've seen one East Greenwich developer brings in expert testimony that says, there's only going to be this many children in the development.
Mhm.
And what they rely on is a whole bunch of actual audits attached of similar housing, right? Here and elsewhere. Of the studies submitted, 2 or 3 of them were age restricted. One of them by the very developer. They have no children. Like, that is not how you do math. And it is not fair or reasonable. And different communities generate different numbers of children in the same developments. And one of the biggest drivers is why the people are moving to the communities. You wouldn't move way out on Division because it's convenient to walk somewhere. You're moving there because of the schools, which means you're bringing children, usually, which is great. It speaks well of our schools and our community. But it also means that we might have a very different population experience than some other community with the same affordable housing. So we absolutely want affordable housing. I want our teachers to live here. I want our cops to be able to live here. I want our employees to be able to live here. I want our children, when our seniors move out of their housing, I want them to be able to stay. All of that's important. All of it under that statute can compete directly with the ability to provide services for our students in this, because it happens in a very narrow window.
All right. Well, that was a deep dive. It's always fun to talk to you about all this stuff. Just to end.
Sure.
What's one thing you hope to be able to achieve if you are elected these next 2 years? Maybe dreamlike versus we're going to handle COVID.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right. So, the things that I wanted to do that you may recall from the interview debates when I first ran, I wanted to change the tax structure to lessen the burden on our residents, make it fair. We did that. We talked about the noise ordinance. We did that. What I wanted to do was fund the schools on that. We rebuilt the government. I said I was going to replace the town manager. We did that. Anyway, all of that was important. And I believe, of course, navigating the COVID crisis is going to be the challenge. I've told you, I think I can help with the state because of what I do for a living. But if we take COVID aside, if we imagine a world pre-COVID, what did I think I wanted to do the next term? 2 big things we have to tackle in our town relate to the parking issue downtown. And we need more parking. No matter what we do to count seats and count heads, if we want to keep a vibrant Main Street, we need more parking, and we need to take action on that. But before we could do it, we had to know numbers. What do we need? And so I want to address that. And a curious thing happened when the first year we were renewing liquor licenses and restaurant licenses, is that we learned that what was happening was they would go to zoning, somebody building a restaurant or retrofitting a restaurant, doing a build out, and they would have a zoning approval. Let's make up a number, 50 patrons. They had to show parking for that. Then you would have a fire marshal put up a capacity that would say it could be 70 or 80. And what they're referring to is the ability to get out
actual,
fire, not seats and parking in compliance with local law. Then they would apply to the last town council and say they wanted 300 in their victualling license and get granted that. You know, I made up that number, 200. And so what then would happen is when the council gave them their license, they would grant them what they asked for without ever asking the question as to what your zoning approval said. So the businesses were managing themselves as if they had a capacity of either A, the fire marshal's capacity on the wall, or B, what was in their victualling license or liquor license, none of which is what the law is. You have to abide by the most restrictive of all of those. And so
the zoning.
Yeah, the zoning. And so what we had to do was put that all online. We went through it all at length, 2 years in a row, getting all that done. We now have all the businesses. We've agreed upon what their capacity is, what their parking is. We've given relief when it was necessary. We've coordinated it all. And so we have that. Now we have a handle on what we need. So the goal was to look at options for actually providing more parking. How do we build more parking and where, right? How do we do it? So that is one of the things pre-COVID that I wanted to do this session. The other is that if you go down to the waterfront and you look at it like it's something new to you, you would see that it does not appear like other waterfront communities where it's like some coordinated effort on the waterfront. It's sort of a hodgepodge of buildings, some of which look like they're falling down. Others are mom and pops. We don't have like a walkway along the water. We don't have things built out into the water. We don't even have a town marina when we have enough room for one. So we look at Scallop Town Park, which still looks like a closed landfill. And people walk around it, but nothing's been done to make that happen. Also, the waterfront isn't integrated with Main Street.
No.
If you get old drawings in the town hall. From Main Street, there were several streets that went right down the waterfront.
Well, and they all were grade crossings for railroads. So they got,
when the railroad came in, those streets still stub end there.
Yeah.
Not that we couldn't build walkways over. It's that we haven't. And so I've been involved in as an environmental lawyer, other waterfront community developments. And so you can go around the country and look at lovely waterfronts that have year-round use. We're seasonal, it shuts down. And I think that the one thing that differentiates East Greenwich from other communities is we have a waterfront. What's also true is that it has not been looked at with an eye towards how does a municipality use it? What could we do that would make it give more opportunities for our residents, make it more year-round for our businesses? And so when I was in the planning board and the Cove Commission, we submitted a joint request to the then council asking them to appropriate money to develop an RFP to go out to the community and have these national and international firms that do these harbor developments to provide us with what they would need in order to look at potential.
Didn't they, I mean, the previous council, I know that a couple of councils back, they were kind of interested in that. And I know Sean Todd made some effort, but they did not. What happened with the RFP?
So I proposed it, right? The planning board and the Cove Commission, we sent it to the council and they received it well, talked about it, but no money was ever appropriated for it. So no RFP ever went out. So when I got on the council, that was a priority of mine. The problem was we had the school committee supplemental appropriation and we didn't know where the finances were. And so we tabled that for the moment. We then, in the second budget, we actually set the money aside for this purpose. So we have the money.
Just for the study.
Just for the study. It's actually to develop. We don't even know exactly what to ask.
Right.
So we need to go out and ask for people who can come and help us frame the question, and what is it we want? Our harbor master, prior harbor master, we asked him to look at this, and he met with Coastal and came back and showed us that there is an area, admittedly, it's in front of the sewage treatment plant, where we could put 150 slip municipal marina.
Wow.
Right? So let's say what we did is we had a developer and we leased that. We don't have to bond it. It's private money, right? There's a waiting list to get into those slips down there. So we could do that maybe. We'd have a harbor dredging plan. It just so happens that the chair of the CRMC happened to have served on our planning board as East Greenwich resident here. I think we have an environmental lawyer on the council who does this. This is a real thing we can do. And so we want to look at that. Would you build a marina there with venues over the water? So year round people could go there. Could you put a ferry spot at the end of it? Right? If the draft is big enough, does it make sense to have a ferry stop there? If you build a ferry stop and the berth is big enough to actually dock a Coast Guard boat of a certain size, the federal government will give you money every year to maintain that on the off chance we're invaded. And they need that. So what is it?
Bite your tongue. In 2020, anything can happen. Really, bite your tongue.
And so would we want a walkway, like a boardwalk there? Would downtown be a nice clamshell concert? Like, what is it we would do? And we don't know. And so the RFP is to ask firms that do this what they would need to look at to come and help us with that. That's the first stage. We appropriated the money. That's been drafted and is out. And we have responses already. So because we allocated the money, that's happening. There'll be the next step, which is we have to then appropriate money to pay someone to do the study.
Got it.
And so those two things, the Main Street parking issue that will allow our business to operate without crowding out all the neighbors, and then looking at the waterfront in some integrated whole and connecting it to Main Street in a real way. Because now it's kind of off. You have to go down King Street and, it's just not First Avenue, the only way in and out. Those are my two wish lists in a non-COVID world.
All right. Well, I thank you. We talked longer maybe than I thought we would, although there's always a lot to talk about. So I appreciate it. And you have a wealth of knowledge. So thanks very much. Good luck in the election, and I will see you in the virtual world.
All right. We'll see you.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.